Thank you very much for joining the 5th Achievers Tech Talk. Like I mentioned in the beginning of all the talks, our goal here is really to give back to the tech community of Toronto and to grow a tech community around just having amazing conversations around technology, scaling, growth companies, etc. Our meetup group has grown from 300 to 436 people, so thank you very much. Just a couple of housekeeping items, all slides, resources, we always post them on the meetup page. As well, the videos are always posted on achievers.com/tech, so if you know somebody that missed it or if you want to check it out later, feel free to check out the site. So our first ever guest speaker in the Achievers Tech Talk series doesn't really need much of an introduction. To say he's built a name for himself here in the Toronto tech community would be a severe understatement. He's worked with some of the best tech companies in the world, including this one. Some of you might not know that. He actually used to be my boss way back when, but he left a few years ago to help start this small company called Xtreme Labs. And again, I'm sure he's going to tell you about all the success they've had, but from what I know, they're one of the most successful software development companies in North America, growing to more than 200 employees in less than 5 years. So that's absolutely incredible. And we're very blessed to have him here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Farhan Thawar, VP of Engineering at Xtreme Labs.
All right, thanks, Zach. So I wanted to, actually maybe I'll start with here, just if folks are using the Twitter, feel free to use Xtreme Labs or FN Thawar. And I wanted to make this a conversation, so if folks have questions, don't wait till the end, just stop me. I'm happy to chat about any of the topics. I know the original topic that Zach and I proposed was Agile, the Xtreme Labs way. Really, this is a talk about how we work. It has a lot of elements of Agile in it, but I definitely want folks to come up and say, hey, you know what, we tried that, it doesn't work, why is it working for you guys? Or we think this is more effective. So happy to chat about that. What is Xtreme Labs? So we build lots of mobile experiences for top brands. Don't want to spend too much time on Xtreme Labs, but we are based in Toronto. We have small offices in New York and Palo Alto. We're also expanding into Europe, Berlin to be exact. What do we work on? So folks were asking me this outside. We spend a lot of time on native app development, and the reason for that is typically the best experiences tend to be native. While we do have great HTML5, for those of you in the mobile world, probably seen lots of hype around HTML5. We do lots of stuff in HTML5, but typically things tend to be better performance and UI flexible in native code. So we tend to spend a lot of time on iOS, on BlackBerry 5 to 7, as well as BB10. Android, Google TV, Windows Phone. We're doing lots of stuff in lots of different areas, and you'll see that from our... The last thing about Xtreme Labs, so Chamath, who's pretty influential in the Valley, made an investment in Xtreme Labs really because he wanted to focus around making sure that, for him, he wanted to have all the best mobile development talent. And he's very influential in the Valley. If folks have never heard of him, you should probably look up some of his talks. Very, very interesting guy to think about. He's also the owner of the Golden State Warriors, the NBA team. Quick background, I went to Waterloo, did computer science and electrical engineering there, have an MBA. My career, Trilogy, Celestica, Microsoft, and Achievers, exclamation mark. So the agenda. I want to talk about three things, and again, turn it into a conversation. I want to talk about freedom versus frameworks, and really, this is around the idea that a lot of companies today have focused really around the employee experience, saying that the more freedom you give employees, the happier they are, and the more work they'll get done. I want to kind of challenge that. How to work. This is a combination of how we work at Xtreme Labs, but how you should think about yourself in terms of the workplace and how to be effective versus just being efficient or maybe not getting stuff done at all. If you're a manager trying to get your folks to do the things that you want them to do. And then career advice for folks who are either looking to go into the startup world, start their own company, or even how to work inside of a large organization to be effective, again, to be able to have an impact on the organization. So first, a disclaimer. I love this chart. This is from a book called The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. And really the chart is the happiness of a turkey before Thanksgiving. So what you're seeing along the axis is days, along the X, and along the Y you're just seeing how happy the turkey is. And really what's happening is every day the turkey gets fed, gets to run around the yard, or maybe is not running around the yard but just getting fed. And it's just getting happier every day, right? Every day I'm getting fed, this life is good, I don't have to do any work, I just get fed, 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 amazing. And then one day, he gets killed because it's Thanksgiving. There's no prior evidence to the turkey that this event was happening. There was nothing in the turkey's life that he could see and say, like, you know what? I could have predicted that on this day I was going to die. So why I wanted to just have this talk with this disclaimer is that nothing that happens in the past is any indication of what's going to happen in the future. No data you can use today, anything that I say, anything anybody else tells you, just because it worked yesterday does not mean it's going to work tomorrow. Okay, so I just want to preface that with whatever I say has worked for us, worked for us in the past as well, may not work in the future, and that's something that you should be challenging yourself when someone's like, oh, this always works, you should use this methodology, or you should use that technology. Like, everything in history has always, changed and shifted, and just because you think that you have this nice trend doesn't mean it's going to continue forever. Especially think about the turkey, who literally had no information to, there's nothing about this graph. If I just showed you the graph before 1,000, there's no way you could have predicted that that steep slope would happen. Okay? All right, freedom versus framework. So I'm sure I don't have to talk too much about tight controls where we see companies that try to force their employees to kind of follow a narrow path, but I really want to talk about two different models of freedom. One is freedom, ultimate freedom, having employees do what they want, and the other is working within a framework. So first, the story. So Dan Ariely, who wrote Predictably Irrational and a bunch of other books like The Upside of Rationality, has a really great study that he did in the school system. So he was teaching 2 classes, and he said, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to give one class more freedom than the other class. I'm going to see how they do on the assignments and also how much happier they are in the course. So he said, okay, class A, your class is normal. We're going to give you an assignment every week. Right? He just said, hey, you have an assignment every week. That's till the end of the class. The next class, he said, you know what? There's assignments, but you can hand them in whenever you want. Right? Who can guess what happened in class B in terms of when they handed in the assignments? At the end. Right? So they handed in the end. So what he wanted to figure out was, well, 2 things. One, how were the assignments? Were they better? Were the grades better? Did people learn more? And then the second thing, the corollary was not only that, was how happy were they? Were they happier because, you know what, they got to pick their own schedule, right? So in the first one, he looked at the grades, and in the second one, he calculated all the grades, and he saw 2 interesting things. One, for the second class, the grades were poorer, way poorer than the first class, statistically significant. So that was one thing. There's okay, classes, the marks were lower, but were they happier? Now the interesting part was in the second one, they were not happier than the first one. The first people in the first class actually enjoyed the class better than the second one. So it's an interesting result, right? He gave them more freedom, they performed more poorly, and they were less happy. So that started leading him to this idea and started leading us to this idea that, you know what, just because you give everybody ultimate freedom, they don't necessarily know what they want. Just giving people the ultimate flexibility, hey, guess what, Zach, hand that in whenever you think you're ready, might not be the right approach to make Zach the happiest or to produce Zach's best work, right? Giving people a framework might be better. There's actually a book called The Results Only Work Environment that focuses on this model that says, you know what, I don't think we have to give anybody any kind of framework. People should be able to work wherever they want, have no meetings, don't have a schedule, not worry about being in the office, as long as they get their work done, right? And I challenge this, because this is the model that a lot of companies follow. Google, you have flex time, come in whenever you want, leave whenever you want, work 20% on whatever you want, right? Microsoft, I worked at Microsoft, every Friday I worked from home. I worked whenever I wanted, I could work from any city, right? I'm starting to challenge those models because a lot of companies are saying, well, let's give employees more freedom. Let them work on whatever they want. Let them go follow this educational path. And again, I want to challenge that because it may not produce the best results. So framework. So I like this picture because this is not one that I took, but I have seen people using a laptop in the bathroom stall before. And it reminded me of a little bit of a framework that we like to use at Xtreme Labs to focus people so that they can actually produce their best work and also be happy. Right? Again, we look back to the Dan Ariely study. It wasn't just better work. It was happier people and better work, those 2 things together. One of those things is multitasking. So the idea that you should be able to work on lots of things at the same time is one that we also see in lots of job descriptions. Good multitasker. You should be able to work on many things at the same time. That's not one that we follow. And we think a little bit of framework helps people actually get around having to multitask. So what do we do at Xtreme Labs? Well, in engineering, what we do is we focus people to single task or monotask. And what that means is work on one thing at a time, one project at a time. I'll talk more about how the engineering teams are set up, but really, in engineering at Xtreme, everyone is only on one project. Right? So you're not multitasking, you're not thinking about multiple clients, you're not thinking about multiple platforms, you're thinking about one project at a time. That focuses people from a multitasking view to a single or monotasking view. The other thing we do to help people work on things that are important is prioritization. So in most workplaces, you're working on a report, and then your boss comes in and says, oh, by the way, I also need report C. And you've already been working on report A, but now I need report C. And it's hard to do both of those things because your boss hasn't come to you. And how many times has your boss come to you and said, oh, this is actually more important than that one, right? It's really hard to get a list of priorities from anyone in a regular workplace. What we do in engineering is we use a tool called Pivotal Tracker. Pivotal Tracker forces you to actually put things in priority order. So if you're working on 10 things, most important to least important, you are forced. The tool does not allow you to do anything else. It forces you to slot that in, which by design pushes other things down. Another little framework trick that allows people to focus on what's most important. So single task, work on things in priority order. The second thing I want to talk about is Parkinson's law. Anybody know what Parkinson's law is? Yes, what is it?
Work expands to fill the time available.
Exactly. So if I said, hey Graham, who works at Xtreme back there, I need this build by next Friday, how long will it take Graham to make the build? Till next Friday. If I said, hey Graham, I need this build in an hour, how long will it take Graham to make the build? Good answer. But no, actually an hour, right? Because really it's around giving people a framework to get stuff done. If you say, hey, you tell me how long you think it's going to take, people will obviously pad it and give you a time that might not be the right amount of time that they need to be happiest and produce their best work. Right? So I'm not saying to compress everything. I'm not saying as a manager you should tell people, hey, I'm going to just give you this amount of time. I'm just saying, if you think that you can get all that data from a short amount of time, if you think you can get the 80% of what you need from that report in 3 hours of work versus 3 weeks of work, you should focus on that. I'd like to see a pro forma of our financial model by Friday versus a month from now. We'll force people to actually probably give you the 80% in that time. Questions about Parkinson's law? Oh, sorry, is there a hand there? No. Yes?
So are you suggesting you explicitly impose a timeline upon them rather than consult them first?
Yeah, I think you need two things, right? So I'll talk about like check-ins as well. I think the idea behind the Dan Ariely experiment as well was this idea that there's a check-in every week. So it's kind of like two things. One, there's like a deadline around, hey, how long do you think this will take? But really around the homework is due every week is a really strong idea. So at Xtreme, what we do is we force everyone to ship every single week. So you understand that you are focusing on the end goal every single week, even though the project might be 3 months long. So you're doing two things. You're saying, hey, here's how much time you have, but I want you to focus on what you can do every week so that you can show something every week. And that forces kind of two things. One, think about the end from the beginning, show something every week. And then you're also giving them a timeline. So, shortening the timeline arbitrarily doesn't make sense, but not letting an arbitrary, not giving someone a timeline doesn't give them enough of a framework. Saying, hey, just do it whenever is probably the bad approach.
My question was more around who sets the timeline.
Good point. So the way we like to do it in engineering anyways, we have engineers estimate the work. So they come in and they say, we think it's going to take this long. The product folks, so the client would actually prioritize the list of stories. And because we're delivering stories every week, that allows the product person to actually change the priority. But really the estimates are still driven by engineering. So the people doing the work are coming up with the estimates still. But because we're delivering something every week and because we do pair programming, which I'll talk about as well, it's really hard to not do work for that entire time period. So we stop people from slacking off, to be frank, by doing pair programming because that forces people to do work. And then we have to show work every week. And then hopefully they get to something close to the deadline. Graham's laughing. I don't know if that's true or not. But cool. So that's kind of the high level idea. Agile. So the things that we do, which I just mentioned, are really fit into our Agile framework. So one part of it is cadence. Every day we do a stand-up as a company. I know Achievers does as well. We do a stand-up as a platform and a stand-up as a team. So the company stand-up is really focused around, like Achievers, focused around news around the company, what's going on, what's happening in tech. The platform stand-ups are more like a Scrum stand-up. So for those of you who are used to a Scrum type stand-up where it's, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Are you blocked on anything? So it should take no longer than 24 hours to get unstuck around something because you really have a group of experts around you who can help unblock you. And then the team. So the team can go around and say, hey, what are you working on today? And some of the teams are as small as 1 pair. We do pair programming, and I'll talk about that. Or as large as 8 or 9 pairs, which is a fairly large engineering team. Those are all focused, again, around cadence. Telling somebody what you're doing every day, telling somebody what you did yesterday, people asking you if you're blocked on something. Again, it's that bringing up of, hey, are you guys moving forward, right? Pair is a big part of that, but really even just coming up in an environment, if you don't do pair programming and just asking people, what are you doing every day, what are you doing tomorrow, it helps people plan, just even on a day-to-day basis. We also ship every week. Yep, go ahead.
Hey, Farhan, can you talk a little bit about who attends which meetings?
Sure.
Farhan, can you repeat the questions?
Sure, yeah, sure. I'll repeat the question. So who attends each meeting? So the entire company comes to the first one. That's at 9:05 in the morning. We have a platform stand-up that happens right after the company stand-up. That's every engineer for a certain platform. So we have an iOS stand-up, we have a BlackBerry 10 stand-up, we have an Android stand-up. If they get too big, we split them. So we might have 2 iOS stand-ups. And then the team one is basically one team. So we might have a team working on Twitter. They're just focused on that. Cool, on that project.
How long will each stand-up?
So each stand-up, the company one is less than 10, each one is less than 10 minutes. So in theory, you'd probably be standing up for 20 minutes, company and platform, and then not all teams have them, because if you're a one-pair team, which a lot of them are, you don't have a stand-up. Cool, other questions about the kind of the high-level Agile pieces that we put in from Cadence? No? Pivotal tracker, so really we kind of feel that if you do these 3 things, it's hard to go off track. So you have a stand-up every day, you have pivotal tracker, which forces folks to prioritize. So again, the funny story about tracker is that I use this in my personal life. Right? So when my wife asks me to do something, I say, what priority should this be? Like, so like, go look at tracker. Here's all the things I got to do. I got to paint the door. I got to take out the garbage. I got to take the Christmas presents to my parents' house. Like, I got to do all this stuff. So when should I do this? Right? So, and the reason that's funny, I mean, it sounds funny, but the reason that we do this is actually kind of a little bit subtle. So when you look at engineering and you give someone a list of 10 things to do, even if it's for the week, what tasks do you think that person's going to do? They're going to do the easiest things first, right? That's always the case. You're like, oh, these things are small, let me do those first, right? And the problem with that approach is actually those are likely, maybe they are, but they might not be the most important things to work on first. They might not have the most risk, they might not have the most customer value, but they're just the easiest from the engineering standpoint. So if there are product people in the room, you'll know for sure that this is not what you want. You do not want the easiest things done first by the engineer standpoint. You want the most important things done first. So tracker forces, this is the most important thing and this is the least important thing for this week. Meaning if you do not get to these things, I'm okay because you got these big things done. That is why tracker is important. That is why I go back to my wife and I say, what is the most important thing that you need me to do this weekend? That should be at the top. Because if I do the easiest thing, which is take out the garbage, I do nothing else, you'll be really pissed. Right? So now my wife gives me a prioritized list of shit to do. Yes?
Yeah. If you take the garbage out first, because
yep.
that's really easy
yep.
and quick,
yep.
and then you tackle the big thing, right? Then you've got 2 things done. As
yes.
opposed to if you tackle the big thing,
but it doesn't,
and you
yeah.
don't get it
yeah.
finished, right? Because it's challenging. By the end of it, you're tired. You don't get to the garbage.
Yeah.
Garbage doesn't get out.
True. I'll give you an example though. Like my big thing right now is like, you know, redo the life insurance on me for my kids, whatever. Like that's super important. More important than the garbage going out. So like, I see what you're saying. Like people will, you know, that's an interesting analogy because the garbage goes out once a week or whatever. But literally, you know, you want people to focus on the most important thing first. And I see what you're saying. I'll get 2 things done. But really, what will happen is I'll just pick another easy thing, right? Like,
I like taking all the easy things,
yep.
getting them out of the way.
Yeah. But then not getting to the hard things.
Preferably shipping them, and then hitting the hard thing.
True.
And then that way, I don't have to worry about all the other.
True. It's interesting. Yeah. Things. Sure. I'm sure you can come up with analogies, but
plus,
yeah.
Your client actually sees that you've.
True. So that's a good point. So the question is like, can I work on the lower priority things because they're easy and I feel like I'm shipping things versus working on the hard things? The problem I've had with that though is clients will come back to us and say, we said these are the highest priority items and you worked on those. Why? Like you're working on the wrong stuff. Right? They've prioritized it based on what's most important to them. So I understand, again, you're looking at it from the engineering perspective. I feel good when I ship, and so we ship every week. But you need to ship the hard stuff. It may be that you look at the first thing and realize that it's not like a day task, it's actually a month task, and I'd rather figure that out on Monday than on like the Thursday. But.
So you don't do that on your own?
Yes.
You actually communicate?
Yes, and that's totally fine.
With the customer?
Negotiate.
You know what? This is important, I agree with you. It's also harder. Yeah. Let's take care of the easy stuff. Yeah. And then that way you'll have those things. Sure. And then we're going to tackle the big things.
Yeah, so that's...
And we won't be distracted with all of the things that are piling up.
Right, so that's me telling my wife, Erica, I want to take the garbage out first, and then she rolls her eyes, and then I do the other thing. Yes. Understood.
So your clients have access to your pivotal tracker?
Yes. Yeah, so our clients have access to our pivotal tracker and our GitHub. They can see the code as we're writing it, as we check in, and they can see everything in pivotal tracker, which means the product owner can reprioritize any unstarted story at any time. And it's literally a movable dashboard, because it's a live dashboard, right? When you hit start on a story, it can move. Like if you guys have not used pivotal tracker, it's awesome. I'm a little biased because we're partners with Pivotal Labs, but it is really, really good and allows you to, it forces you to prioritize. It does make the job a little bit harder on the product owner, but the right amount of difficulty, meaning they should think about this new feature that they want implemented against all the old stuff that they wanted, not just add it in and say, oh yeah, by the way, I wanted 10 things, now I want 11. What they should be forced to do is put it in and say, well, actually, it's in the middle here, and these other ones are less important.
So the engineers don't have to worry about what they have to do first. It's like right there.
But they can, like Alfred said, they can actually negotiate and say, you know what? The code that we are touching up here actually is very close to the code of this feature down here. So do you think that if we move this up that it still makes sense because we think we can get it done faster? That's a negotiation. I've seen clients say yes. I've seen clients say no. They'll be like, no, actually, we really do only want those two things because we need that next thing done right away versus that thing. So it's a negotiation. The last thing is DLs, which are like distribution lists. Another interesting thing we've seen on projects, and this happens in lots of companies, is that a lot of people are not on the same page. And the reason they're not on the same page with a project is because there's some project mailing list that everyone uses, but then like there's a side conversation between like a product manager on the client side and the developer and says, oh, can you just do this like one thing? Can you like move that? And like, you know, hey, how much budget is left and all that kind of stuff. All these side conversations, and so we kill them. We say that every conversation for the project must be over the mailing list. Everyone. Meaning if the CEO of the company emails somebody directly, they must reply and CC the entire deal. That is the rule. And what that gets away from is all these side conversations. Right? Everybody's aware of everything that's going on in the project.
But only people on the project?
Yes, only people on the project. Yeah, only people on the project. Yeah, so we have two things. We have like a XL underscore, right? If we're doing Globe and Mail, XL underscore TGAM, the Globe and Mail, and then TGAM, which is like just Globe and Mail for everybody. So we can have an internal technical discussion if we want, but it's really around the client doing these side conversations. The other thing I didn't write on here is product owner. We force the clients to have one product owner, meaning they really should have one person who owns the product because we're always going to get external people, CEOs and VPs sending us emails saying, this is red, it should be blue. And so we'll go back and well, Dave's the product owner. What does Dave think? We'll focus all the attention on the one person so that they can actually have that one voice of the product. Otherwise, you get this design by committee and it doesn't really produce anything of value. Right? You want somebody to have a product vision around that. And then Dave can make the hard decision. Yeah, we designed it as blue, it should be red, it should be pink, like whatever it is. Just one person. Yeah?
Do you get a lot of pushback in terms of people not liking the DL? Like are engineers or like other folks just too much chatter that they'll just get frustrated?
Do people not like the DL? I haven't seen that. I mean, one thing that we do is so our project team is the following. We have pairs of engineers from 1 to 9 so far. We have a product manager who's shared a bunch of projects. We have QA who's shared among a bunch of products. And then we have designers. So do people not like the DL? I haven't seen that people don't like the DL. I think what we find is lots of clients email one person directly because they want to distract anyone else. But we just make sure that everybody, like the rule is you have to reply with the CC. So everyone replies to the CC. It's just the rule. Like we just say, like I said, again, framework, right? You have to pair program, you have to ship every week, you have to use Pivotal Tracker, you have to use a DL, and then everything else is like up to you. You have to, work through stories in order, right? But really that's the framework we use because after that you can, as an engineer, you can, you have freedom to like architect it how you want and you have all these other freedoms, but those are the pieces of framework we put in, like the homeworks do every week, to have people create their best work and be happy. Yes?
So, we try some collaboration software, and I asked that the framing that for email, I find that in a project, a lot of people start ignoring a particular thread, and they don't know that, 2 emails down the thread, that something's relevant to them again. And also start to extract information from an email thread.
Yeah, so the way I'll repeat the question. So email can get distracting, but also you might mute the thread, but then it becomes relevant 2 or 3 messages later. So how do I know when it's relevant to me? So what we say is like email discussions are fine for the DL, but any actions have to go back into Tracker, right? So engineers only work from Tracker. They never look at an email and say, yes, I will do that. They will reply with, yes, I will put that into Tracker, right? And then what will happen is that'll force again the client to prioritize. Because you don't want the person to be like, oh, I'm just going to drop everything and do what you just said in the email, because even the product owner probably forgot all the things that they're working on. So instead, by putting it into Tracker, they might be like, you know what, I'm right. This is the most important thing you should be working on. Drop everything else, they put it at the top of the Tracker. Or, oh yeah, I just looked at this. Really, it should be in the middle. That's the reason. So the email list can go on, and we have other people like a product manager who can help if the engineers are coding to kind of help put that stuff in Tracker with the client. They get really good. Once they like Tracker, they love Tracker. Like a lot of our clients have moved to Tracker for their other projects as well because of the working with us. So there's another question in the back. Good one. So casual conversation. So I'm a huge, huge fan of in-person conversations because they are the highest bandwidth. I think like 60 to 90% of conversation happens non-verbally, so being in front of somebody is huge. Again, whatever actions come out of there, either we'll send a summary over the email DL if they're just like informational. FYI, we just found out that there's 4 more weeks in the project, or you know, we're going to get new designs, like whatever that is, a summary is sent out to the email, whether it happens over IM or something else that gets copied. And any actions, priority-wise, get put back into Tracker. So Tracker is really the only place engineers should have to look for work. There may be context in the emails, but really the Tracker is where all the work comes from. So you shouldn't start anything. Like even if you think, hey, I forgot I should do this, they put it in Tracker first and then start it from there. Any other questions about that? You can I'll keep going and then we can always come back to things. Ship every week. This is a huge part about how we work. It means the homework's due every week. It means the client gets the real deal material every single week, meaning we do not send a status report, we don't send a PowerPoint slide that has a red, yellow, green traffic light on it. We send them the build that they install on their phone every single week. It's really easy to see that we are either moving closer or farther away from their goal because they're going to install it and say, this is better looking, has more features, is faster, or not than last week. Very, very easy. Also, we do lots of things internally on a weekly basis. We demo every week all of our products to the employees. So we have 4 or 5 different rooms. You go to any room. If anybody's interested, come around 4 o'clock to Xtreme Labs on a Friday. Walk in and we have a demo room set up and people are showing stuff about what's going on. We do product demos every week where product managers demo everything. QA tests things every week. Designers closer to the end of the project go through all the stuff every week just to make sure it's pixel perfect. There's lots of things that happen on a weekly basis. Everything at Xtreme is based on a week. Cool? Yeah?
So does that mean that you have specific time allotted to demoing?
Allotted to?
Like to demoing?
Yes.
Days,
yeah.
Like a couple hours?
Yeah, so the question is, yeah, are there times allotted to demoing? So every Friday from 4 to 5, the entire company is in demo rooms. Every Friday from 4 to 5, we just split up in lots of different rooms. We used to be 1 room and watch it all, and now we're like 5 rooms watching demos. And we demo everything, web projects, to iOS, to Android, to like every project that we're working on. Cool. Again, that's a cadence thing. I mean, the other cadence thing we do, I'll talk about breakfast after. Map. So there's a really cool talk by Dan Pink around motivation, and I wanted to kind of bring up the pieces that I noticed later on after watching his talk that we do at Xtreme, and I thought it'd be interesting for you guys to watch. So Dan Pink wrote a book called Drive. He wrote a new book just called, I think, To Sell is Human, or something like that. And he talks about 3 things that to have an engaging workspace, you need 3 things. You need mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Mastery, becoming really, really good at something, best in the world at something. Autonomy, not being micromanaged. Purpose, working on something bigger than yourself. And so I wanted to slot in the things that I think we're doing that actually fit into this model and have played into like how we designed the workspace. So mastery is all around pairing. So I didn't talk about pair programming that much, but pair programming is this idea that you have 2 engineers on 1 workstation. So it's 2 engineers, 2 keyboards, 2 mice, 2 monitors, but it's 1 computer. So 1 computer is an iMac, 27-inch. The other monitor is just a Dell 27-inch monitor. They have the same resolution. There's 2 keyboards and 2 mice, and they're both looking straight ahead at exactly what they're working on. Why is this interesting / useful? Well, the number 1 reason to do it is actually knowledge transfer and learning. Whenever we have a new platform and we have somebody who knows it, we pair them with someone else who doesn't know it, another smart engineer who knows computer science, who knows programming, who doesn't know the platform, and by an apprenticeship can learn that platform very, very quickly, extremely quickly, faster than I've seen anybody learn any programming language before, including myself. Yes? Is anything 100% of the time? No. So we pair most of the time. There are times, you're sitting beside Graham, who runs a lot of our development for the NBA, and what he does is, we've got this idea that we have also side-by-side programming when pair programming doesn't make sense. Side-by-side programming means you are close enough, this close, to be able to see what is on the other person's screen, but you are using 2 different computers. Most of the time, though, we do pair. The idea behind it, again, Learning from someone else, the apprenticeship model, like in the old days, if your father was a blacksmith and you became a blacksmith, you apprenticed with that person. That's what we do with pairing. It has a really good side effect around time on task. Your pair does not want to read your email. Maybe they do, but they probably don't want to read your email / IM conversations / Twitter, look at your Facebook page, so it's really hard for you to do those things. Hence, why pair programming keeps people on task. Knowledge transfer of a project. If we want to grow a team from 1 pair to 4 pairs, we can grow from 1 to 2 pairs very easily because the 2 people working on it have been on it the whole time, and we split them. We don't lose any context. We bring on 2 new people. We train those people up, and then we can split again. It's very, very easy to transfer knowledge on platforms and projects via pair programming. If somebody leaves, like an intern leaves the company, we don't lose anything. We have touched every single line of code. That means we can put interns on real projects. Yes, whoa, 2 hands went up at the same time. Yep.
My question is around employee satisfaction. A lot of people that go into programming or coding are not necessarily the most social people, or prefer working alone.
Yep.
So how do you manage that sort of a situation? I think it could be taxing if I don't all the time with somebody else.
We manage it on the front end, meaning we tell people it's a pair programming environment, and then they can say, oh, I'm interested or not interested. The thing that I found revealing was that when we ask people why they apply to Xtreme Labs, almost all of them say because of pair programming. They want to do it. You will find people, some people come in and they're like, hey, we do pair programming. Oh, I'm not interested. I'm like, cool, take it easy. But what we found is that people who haven't done it before try it, and when they try it, they really enjoy it, either because when you're teaching somebody something, you have to know it to a certain level to teach it, so they enjoy that portion. And then once that person, because they're still smart, they'll still ask you interesting questions, and you'll be like, oh, I wonder why that is that way. Like, you'll get good feedback that way. And then over time, they'll become really good at some other part of the system that then will feed back into you. So that apprenticeship, the 2-way works really well. The context you're learning together works out really well. I mean, all those things are really, really good. The time on task works out really well because you're literally coding. So I didn't talk about that, but we have set hours at Xtreme Labs. We don't have work from home, so it's like 9 to 6 in the office. And that works really well because you come in, you pair, you go home. So it's not this freedom versus framework thing. We give people a framework. Come in at 9 o'clock. There's a stand-up at 9:05. There's free breakfast at 9 o'clock, catered. And then there's lunch, and then at 6 o'clock, hopefully you leave. Right? Hopefully, there's crunch time in any company on any project, but typically you're in at 9 and you're leaving at 6. Right? And that focuses people to say, hey, I only have this time to work, versus the Microsoft Google model of, hey, I can just go in whenever and leave whenever. Well, it's really hard to plan my day that way. Versus, hey, I have to kind of leave by 6. I have to leave exactly. If I want to leave at 6, I got to really focus on my work. That doesn't mean you can't take breaks and stuff. It just means focus on the amount of work you want to do in that day. It's really hard to not work in a pair, right? It's really hard for 2 people to sit around and stare at Dig or BuzzFeed or something, right? Yes, so you had a question? Oh, sorry, I had one.
So what do you do when you have 2 programmers who have very different skill levels?
Yep.
And one is obviously stronger. I mean, how can that just learn from the other person?
Yeah, so because everyone is smart and still, sorry, I'll repeat it. Yeah, so how can 2 differently skilled engineers work together, especially if they're really far apart? So what we found is that even though someone might not be that skilled, they typically still have an understanding of computer science and still can ask interesting questions, so the one who is more advanced can teach them. And over time, hopefully they move up and they realize, oh my God, this person is actually really smart and I'm learning from that person. I mean, it's more than one occasion where we've had interns pair with some of our full-times and really push our full-times. Meaning they didn't know the platform, they just came out of Waterloo or U of T or Queens or somewhere and was really smart. And we're like, wow, this person's really, really sharp. They don't know anything about mobile. And then they work with people and we're like, holy crap, this person's really good. Even though they didn't know anything, because they're just smart and asking the right questions and they're learning things and saying, why don't you do it this way? And why'd you do it that way? That still is helpful. Cool, a question in the back? Yeah.
What's your utilization rate? Because you seem to be talking about really systemized processes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I mean, we do a lot of, so we work on about 50 apps at the same time. We have about 150 engineers. And utilization is a weird number because we have a consulting part of the company that works on client projects, and then we have internal projects. So everyone's always utilized, and the mix between internal and external just changes. But we've been at points where we're in the high 90s of utilization, depending on what you're working on what week it is. But yeah, it can move around. I mean, one thing with pairing too is we can move people around. Right? It can be oh, this is not really we want somebody who knows security and this person knows graphics. Let's swap them. And the clients don't lose anything because everybody's got context, right? Yeah, in the back. Yes, we do. We bill per pair. Yeah.
Usually in pairing, there's one person that's driving and the other person is
Mm-hmm.
You did mention that you guys have 2 monitors, 2 sets of keyboards.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that mean they can both pair at the same time?
No. So it's very similar to like an airplane where there's a pilot and co-pilot. They both did the exact same controls. One person is driving and one person is navigating, and they can switch at any time. So when the pilot goes to the bathroom, the co-pilot takes over. Here, because of just like, you know, getting unstuck. So in engineering, a lot of what happens is you get stuck. So you're working on something like, why is that happening? I'm gonna go look it up in Google. I gotta like ask somebody, like you get stuck. Hopefully with 2 people, you get stuck at different points. So you get unstuck faster and the navigator goes, oh, remember yesterday? And just takes over. And then you don't lose your flow. What was that?
Both keyboard and mouse are connected, so they
Yes. They can both take it over. Yeah, you obviously can't type at the same time, but they can just, the navigator can take over, and then the driver becomes the navigator, and then the navigator becomes the driver. The other thing, because of flow, the old model of I have my headphones on, I'm programming, and then if somebody interrupts me, it takes me 20 minutes to get back into flow, doesn't really happen here, because someone asks me a question, my pair can keep going, I can answer the question, come back, and now my pair brings me right back into the line of code that we were working on, or some other function. So it's very easy to stay into flow. Yes?
What about designers?
What about designers? Do they pair, you mean? I would love it if they paired. We tried it. I would love it if designers paired, marketers paired, accountants paired. Yeah, so our designers do not pair today. You can ask them why. But I think there's, I mean, like even similar to the question of like, does everybody 100% pair? I think there are times when people should pair and when people should not, but designers so far, I haven't figured out a way to have them pair.
And just related to that, do your designers write code? Like are they?
Depends on the designers, but yes, our designers write code, including like, you know, like, could be front-end code. It could be just like really in-depth. It could be, depends on the designer. It could be Photoshop, InDesign, or it could be like JavaScript. Yeah, question, yeah.
What's your story to the clients about the economics of having people on one?
That's a good one. Someone asked me this outside. So what's the economics? How do you explain to your clients what the economics is around having 2 people do the same job versus having them do 2 different jobs? So my line is typically that it, you know, pair programming works in practice, but I'm not sure if it works in theory. Right? So what that means is like, I'm not sure what the research is behind pair programming. I've read a lot of it, but really what we're finding is that giving 2 people 2 tasks, A and B, versus giving the 1 pair tasks, A and B, right away you already have a great you know, consolidator because you're forcing the client to think about which is more important, which I think is already good. Because let's say something happens and you only get to A, then instead of having half of A and half of B, you already have at least all of A. And what we're seeing as well is they have to be maybe convinced on the first project, but typically by week 3 or 4, they're very convinced because we outrun. So we spend a lot of time working on a project for a client where they're doing something internal and we're doing something as well. So they might be doing like iOS and we might be doing BlackBerry or something like that. And it's very clear after only a few weeks that we are moving much, much faster than they are.
So that's my follow-up would be, have you looked at the velocity impacts on your program?
Yeah, so we haven't compared, so it's really hard to do like exact people, exact environment and say you guys pair and you guys don't pair, guys and gals. But what we found is, again, just having the time on task, right? Most Agile teams only plan for like 4.5 to 5 hours of coding per day. We get 9, but it is 2 people. But time on task is higher and we get all these other benefits. We have time on task higher, we have calendar time gets shrunk. Because we get 9 hours of coding per day. We get knowledge transfer, we get no silo, we get apprenticeship, learning, like we get, you know, smart people working with smart people, like we have all these advantages. Plus it takes around the same time. And hopefully it's better, faster, higher quality, more knowledge transfer, more people looking at the code, etc. Less hacking. Yes? Right. Interruptions, yeah. So in this, what's good about this is that one person getting interrupted and the other person can keep going. Similar to like if one person goes to the bathroom, the other person can keep going. So we found that it takes less time to get back into flow when you're pairing than if you are singular coding. Because flow, before you've got your trance music on and you're like, and then somebody comes in and stops you and you're like, oh crap, now I gotta like, you know, get back into where I was and remember where I was versus hopefully the pair is still going. And our office is actually really loud because people are always talking and not many people are on earphones. And so they get used to this like roar of work getting done. Like what I found even for myself is that I work better when I'm in that room because people are doing work, right? One of our rules is that everyone should be able to see everyone else's screen. People can walk by my desk and see like what I'm working on. That's fine. If I'm doing something confidential like an offer letter, I just shrink the font. Like seriously, I'm like, you can see what I'm doing. Like actually, it's a room in which work gets done. So people feel that, and if everybody's interested, you should come for a tour. Yeah?
So how high up the hierarchy does this go? Like, do you have software managers, like how high up does it vary?
Yeah, so we have the following. So we used to have a very flat hierarchy. I used to have 150 engineers report to me directly, nobody in between. And then Chamath, who was the investor, came in and said, this won't work when you have 400 people. And so I said, okay. So we now have a hierarchy where we have a couple of engineering directors and 4 engineering managers. The engineering managers still code a lot of the time, so they just pair. There's no difference like we have hierarchy now too, like staff. We have like a little list of titles. Before everyone was an Agile engineer. Now we have Agile engineer, lead engineer, staff engineer, principal engineer. Everybody pairs. That's the answer. Directors and myself are the only people in engineering who don't like code anymore, although I wish I did. All right, autonomy, no micromanaging. So I can talk about pairing more later, but autonomy, it's impossible to micromanage when you have that many people. But really, Tracker is the way in which you find your work. So it's not, you don't have to ask people what you're supposed to be doing. You just look in Tracker. And then purpose. We work on stuff that's used by millions of people. People download it. So you can imagine that people feel like they're working on something big. Physical space. So I'll talk about breakfast hacks. So in office versus work from home. I used to be a big fan of work from home. I used to do it every Friday when I was at Microsoft. And what we've noticed, again, is that in-person communication is huge. Being physically in front of somebody, you can actually get all of the communication that they are trying to get across to you. So we do everything in person. Breakfast hacks is an interesting one. So I'm not a big fan of policies. So it's, one story that came up was that we have breakfast every day, and it's catered. We have lots of interns, like 60. And the interns would come in, and they would eat all the breakfast. Right? Even though we'd be like, okay, well, it's this many, this many portions, and we have 200 people, and we'll buy it for this many, and you come in and you'd be like, oh, the bacon's gone, or for some reason we have chicken nuggets and hot dogs, but chicken nuggets and hot dogs are gone. And so we had like these breakfast hacks. I'm like, well, I can send out a stupid email that says like, do not eat too much food. Like I don't know how to write that email. So instead, we just got smaller plates. It was like an awesome hack. Right, like that's the kind of ideas we're looking for. Is like, well, don't have a policy. Just like so now we literally have some like interns walking around with like these vertical like plates of stuff, but breakfast does not run out, right, Ruth? See? So, but that's the kind of stuff that we try to do. Instead of having a policy, we're like, well, we don't need a dress code policy. If somebody wore, this happened one time. One of the engineers, a guy, came in and his shirt had no sleeves, and I was like, okay, kind of it's summer, but I was like, you know what? You should probably wear sleeves. Right? And after that, nobody ever again wore no sleeves because they looked around and they're like, oh, everybody's wearing sleeves. Wear sleeves. Right? We don't need to have a policy. We don't have a dress code policy. Right? So my idea was like, you shouldn't have to check the rule book for stuff. You should just be like, general kind of community knowledge around what to do and what not to do versus around, hey, like hopefully things are just like do whatever you think you need to do versus coming up with a policy and saying, I got to read this like, dress code policy. Sit close together. I talked about this outside as well where, we're looking for new space. Right? We have about 20,000 square feet, and I was looking at a space, I'll tell these guys, 45,000 square feet. I'm looking at it tomorrow, and everyone was like, awesome, we're going to have so much room, and we can spread out. I'm like, no, we're not going to spread out. Right? I'm a big fan of people sitting close together, like this close. So we would just FYI for the people from Xtreme, we're going to sit really close together and have lots of common areas. Right? Because getting feedback from folks, sitting close to people looking at everyone else's screen, allows people to see what everyone's working on and get this idea of trust. Everyone can trust everybody. No one's just fucking around on Twitter and Facebook, right? You can actually look around and be like, people are working on stuff. Very, very easy. Again, no policy. I don't have to like limit anything. It's just like very easy to understand what's going on. Great machines and fast internet. We want to make sure all that stuff works, and a good location has allowed people to be like, hey, the office is the best place to work for what I want to do versus work from home. Here's another one of the things that I want to talk about around micromanagement, right, versus actually giving people freedom. So the left is kind of where you don't want to be, and the right is where we are. So the left is like this idea that, hey, in some companies, all the decisions get made at the top, and really all you do when you're on the rank and file is just implement. So the top is the head, and the rank and file is like you're the arms and legs. Right? And the idea is that, well, I don't get to make any decisions. I just really have to do what I have to do. And what happens there is you do the minimum. Right? Have you guys watched Office Space? Watch Office Space? And Jennifer Aniston's in the restaurant, and she's only got her 2 pieces of flair, right? And the manager's like, well, you only got 2 pieces of flair. And she's like, two, you only said I have to have 2. That's the minimum, right? He's like, well, do you want to have the minimum? Or do you want to be like this, whoever he was, who had 15, right? That happens on this side. When you have no decision-making authority, all you do is just when your manager tells you what to do and you have to do it. This is what we want to do. We want to have higher order choices and lower order choices, right? So we have a little bit of a framework, right? So the CEO and the exec team comes up and says, we're going to go after mobile. we're going to spend time in media, sports, banking, right? And then people down here can go, oh, I'm in banking. Like, what should I do to get banking going? And they can come out to their teams and say, you got to spend time making all the calls. You should spend time researching banking. So everybody has decisions, right? Engineers can decide how they actually do their development after they've worked with the client to figure out priorities and they have to ship every week. That's how it should work, versus being like ultimately like, I'm the development manager. You work on that feature and you do that. And like, this person's not even writing any code, right? It's really hard to get this kind of behavior because you're going to get that kind of behavior. You're going to get 2 pieces of flair when you want 15. All right, so flat hierarchy. We used to have a flat hierarchy, but we also don't have that many approvals, right? I think I have a slide about it later, and I call it do-ocracy. We call it do-ocracy, right? We don't want people to approve anything. When people come up to me like, don't ask me for approval, just do it. And I don't really mean just like ask for forgiveness. Like, I mean really just do it, right? If like, I think somebody was like, how come we don't have, I don't remember the type of green tea. Why don't we have this type of green tea in the office? And I said, because you didn't buy it and expense it. That's the reason. That's the reason. What happened after that? That person went and bought it and expensed it. I'm like, that's why we don't have that green tea. Like, just do it. If you think we should have it, go do it. If you think we should have an arcade machine, go build an arcade machine. They did. Right? So that's the idea behind the approvals. Like, no one should ask for approvals. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, too. I think I'm just going out of order. But you don't want people to approve because it also has this idea of a fallback. Like, if I said, hey, you know what? Do your work, but I'm going to approve it before you send it. What's going to happen? You're going to do like your 2 pieces of flair and then look for me to find all your mistakes because you have that fallback of like, oh yeah, well, Farhan approved it. I don't want that. I want you as the employee to feel the danger and the stress that's going to happen if you, not if you make a mistake, but if you don't think of all the things that you're supposed to do. Right? You should feel that. Right? A good example of that is in like, I think in one of the, I don't know where it was, I think it was Norway or Sweden. They took a town and they took all the street signs out and they're like, all the accidents went down like by like some massive percentage because all the drivers became like super aware. They're like looking around like, oh crap, there's no signs, like what's, right? But that's what I want to happen. I want people to be like, hey, I own this. This is my whole thing. No one's going to approve it. Farhan's not going to look at it before I send it to the NBA. I'm just going to do it. And you got to think of all the things you got to do, right? That's ownership. That's responsibility. I love this quote. Accountability is what's left once responsibility has been subtracted. I hate the word accountable. You're accountable for that. No, you're responsible for that. And this is actually, this quote is so random, you should look it up. It's from an article on the Finnish school system and teachers and like why they're kicking every other country's ass. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. And then this one's like tight controls cause blow-ups. Like this is Nassim Taleb in his new book, Anti-Fragile. It talks about if you put too much control around people, you think that that's going to help, but what's going to happen is everyone's just going to think the controls are saving them from stuff, and then something else will blow up, like the banking system in the US. Approvals, that's it. You should feel the dangers and stressors of owning the entire thing versus being like, oh yeah, don't worry, Farhan's going to approve that scope before it goes out to whoever. I'm not going to do that. Actually, that happened to us. The sales engineer said, I want you to approve it. I said, no, you feel the danger before you send it out. I said the exact words. How to work. All right. These guys, people will remember the first line, managers create work for each other. Tim Burns, who used to also work at Achievers. This is why we try to keep the number of managers at Xtreme Labs very, very low, because this is totally true. Managers create work for each other. When we had fewer managers, there's less work. No policies, so there's a good book called Rework that talks about that. I talked about that with the dress code and not really, trying to have people have to read some manual, right? It should be obvious. One-on-ones I didn't talk about too much here. We don't try to do one-on-ones that often. I find that scheduled one-on-ones haven't really worked at Xtreme Labs. What we do instead is like, I'm around a lot, so we try to do unscheduled one-on-ones. So I used to work at Microsoft and I had a one-on-one every week with my manager. Actually, even at Achievers, we had a one-on-one every week. And what I found was that there's always something to talk about every week, but the big talks, the ones that are like career inspirational, like I really think I should be doing this, or something's blowing up, never happened during that scheduled time. So instead, what we said, especially when I had 150 engineers, is that why am I just not around all the time? And it'd be easier for folks to grab me when they need me. And it works out much better versus scheduling. And then faster to talk to someone. So we talk about this at Xtreme all the time. Do not email, phone, or IM somebody when you can walk over there and talk to them in person and get the full bandwidth conversation. And this Achievers, when the email system went down, and I printed out those forms that said email to and whatever, and we made people walk over and talk to people. Sounds funny. All right, socials, again, another way for people, yeah, sorry.
Going back to the approvals.
Yeah.
So the reason why you have approvals is so that,
Yeah, so again, the anchor engineer, the engineer who's in charge of the project, the product manager, they should all have all the context, right? So the corollary to that is if somebody came to me and said, hey, I can't do this because I don't have all the context. I don't know all the backstory, whatever. Then I should tell you the whole backstory, right? Like, that's how we started at Xtreme. Like, when I started there too, they're like, hey, Amr and Sunny, who are the co-founders, were like, hey, before you talk to this client, come talk to me because you don't have all the context. And right away I replied with, give me the context. Because you can't go through people to get anything done because you're going to have two things. You have a broken telephone, and then you're going to also have this time delay. So instead of having a broken telephone and a time delay, we have our engineers talk directly to the client. And we make sure very quickly that they have all the context they need in order to have those right conversations and right decision-making ability with the client directly. Don't have to go through anybody else. They can talk to whoever they want. Go and talk to people, find out what they're thinking, ask them questions, but that doesn't mean you should get approval before you talk to anybody. Anyone should be able to talk to anyone. There's no like approval system for that. Yeah?
If you have your engineers talking directly to your client,
yep.
who acts as the product owner inside of Xtreme Labs?
So we mostly rely on the product owner to be on the client side. So we have a product manager on our end. They're on the project, and they can act as the client, but every week the client actual product owner is the one accepting stories. So I mean, we think about it as like going to the optometrist, right? You sit in the chair, you look through the glasses, and you say, I like lens A versus lens B. And then they give you another set, and you're like, I like lens C or lens D. It's really hard for me to sit in the chair for you. So
is that project manager then the one who's also helping to vet the icebox and the backlog?
Yeah, the client product owner, we call it product owner, they're the ones who are setting priorities, and they are making sure that they are doing story acceptance, meaning giving feedback on every build that goes out every week. Cool? We have a bunch of socials to get people together. We have a Wednesday social. We have 3-on-3 lunches where we get 3 people who have been at Xtreme for a long time with 3 newbies. They go out. We have Friday social, beer and cake after demos every Friday. Lots of team events, like we take people to movies all the time. Cineplex is one of our clients, so we can do that. And we have lots and lots of interns and lots of social events with those folks to get people physically together. Yes?
How do you manage kind of pushback from the engineers there with regards to why something else is prioritized against something, like in terms of their questioning, why something's not done, for example, if they want something easier?
Yeah. Well, so what happens is they can only work on things in order, right? So because they can only work on things in order, the only discussion can be, how come you didn't get this far? Right? So it's not around what did you work on, it's more around, hey, how come you didn't get here? And maybe they could get blocked. It might be like, hey, you have to get this feed from the API, and the API is not ready because it's a client API. You can just tag it with the word blocked and move on to the next story. But really the only conversation can be, well, why didn't you get as far as we thought you were going to get? And that conversation can be, oh, I got stuck on this because of this issue, or I didn't know this Android had this bug, or whatever it is. That's the conversation, but you can never really have a conversation around, like, why is this prioritized higher than that? Or you can, I mean, you could have it with the client, because you could say, hey, you know what? I've built lots of apps. I believe that this is higher priority, but you know your business better than I do, and they can take your advice or not. That's typically the discussion around that. Pairing, so I probably talked about this. Pairing all the time, although in quotes. We do try to pair most of the time. We do side-by-side. So if you are in an engineering company and you can't do pairing, I would highly suggest you do at least side-by-side programming, meaning sit beside somebody close enough that you can see each other's screens. That'll keep you under wraps as well. There was a really interesting article, I think, 3 months ago, Manish Sethi wrote a blog post called "Why I Hired Somebody for $8 an Hour to Punch Me in the Face if I'm on Facebook." Did you read that? And literally, he has a video. He's in the coffee shop, and he hired this girl to sit beside him, and every time he went on Facebook, she slapped him. And his productivity went up like 4x, right? And it's the same thing behind this. And I actually went on his blog, and I'm like, why don't you just pair? Right? Like, literally, you should just pair. But literally, there's a video. He's just like, thing, and he's like, goes to Facebook, she like slaps him. He's paying her to do it. His productivity literally went up 4x. Because it's so hard. There's so many distractions. Twitter, Facebook, email, IM. Like, it's impossible. SMS. Being busy is a form of laziness. So again, this is around effectiveness versus efficiency, right? Tracker forces us to work on the most important things. Just because you are busy doesn't mean you're getting anything done. Just because you can triage 1,000 emails a day doesn't mean you got anything done. But if you are working on stories from Tracker, you're hopefully working on the right things per what your client needs. Maybe I'll skip the responsibility ladder because I'm going really long. Democracy versus do-ocracy. So again, this is the idea that you don't have to really ask people to do stuff, just do it. Decisions versus deliberation. Yeah, like we try to spend our time on decisions versus like don't infinitely try to decide things. You never have perfect information. just make a decision. It's actually quicker, this is something Chamath always tells me, it's actually quicker just to make a decision immediately and fix it later than it is to deliberate forever, or even deliberate for a day. How to work, so you should try to remove process. I won't talk about that too much. So the great decider. So one of the things that I spend my time on is actually just helping people decide, right? So people say, hey, should I choose option A or B, and we're not sure how to go, what way we should go on the project. I just pick one randomly, right? I'm just like, oh, you should just do A. Doesn't matter, because the idea is that as long as you pick one and move forward, it's faster to do that one. You might be right, you might be wrong, but it's faster to just do that and fix it later than it is to decide forever. Don't take forever to decide, just pick one. And this is what else I do. I fight fires, do sales calls, and unblock engineers. All right, a little bit of career advice. So this is for folks who are earlier in their career, but even later, what we found and what I've started to listen to in this good article in HBR talks about this idea around career imprinting, which is that where you start your career off at is really how you work for the rest of your life. And for me, I worked at a company called Trilogy, and that set off how I worked later. And so whether you're early or even later in your career, working with people who work a certain way, you might come across people who are like, oh, that person must have worked at Microsoft or McKinsey or Achievers because they work a certain way. It's really important early on, especially, to figure out where you should work. So something for those who are kind of early in their career. Go deep over broad. Talked about this with somebody just before this talk too. Whenever you are trying to choose if you are going to do like lots of different things in a very shallow way, or you can do a few things in a deep way, you should almost always choose the few things in a deep way. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of value in becoming the best in the world at something versus there's not lots of value doing a lot of little things. Right? And this is why I also tell people like Zach not to do an MBA. Because I have an MBA, that is the weakest degree because it is the most general and the most people do it. So by definition it is weak. But if you can do an MBA in something very specific, might be something that you think could get you some leverage. Strengths over weaknesses, that is Michael Jordan playing baseball, which doesn't make any sense. But if you have a choice again to focus on your weaknesses or your strengths, people tell me all the time I should play golf because it's good for business, but I suck. So instead I try to play soccer, which I actually have fun at, and maybe can get to like a 7 out of 10 in soccer, and maybe not spend my time becoming a 3 out of 10 in golf. Questions? Smart over dumb. So this is one that people ask me all the time. Like, again, if you have a choice between working with the smartest people and the dumbest people, like it sounds obvious, but a lot of people I know are like, I'm going to take the lazy route and I'm going to go to a company where like I know everything and I'm the smartest person there. Like, it's like the exact wrong job choice to make. You should be the dumbest person on your team. Right? If you're not the dumbest person on your team, you should evaluate where you work. Right? Because then you're like, wow, I'm the smartest person. Like, you're not going to learn as much as you are if you work with somebody really smart. Or a group of people really smart. This is a real sign. Like, it's so random. I've talked about this with a few people as well. Low information diet. There's been like one tip over the last 5 years that's given me like the most amount of time in my life, and it's called don't read the news. And it has been amazing. Like, I literally don't read the news. I try to like limit my news to like what people tell me, and I'll look it up later. Or I have like what I call this reading hierarchy, where I prioritize books over magazines, over like blogs, over Twitter, like that kind of stuff, so I can really focus on things that hopefully have like non-temporal value that don't just become obsolete. So I see people reading the newspaper all the time, and I'm like, I even do lots of newspaper apps, but I try to focus things on like the stories that would make an impact on you versus just like temporal, like what's happening here when stories. Like a good example, HBR. There's a good article in HBR from 1967 called Motivating Employees, which is still relevant today. Air traffic control. It's funny, most of these I talked about outside. I know less than you do, so when engineers come to me, I try to just have them randomly decide on something, or I push it back to them. Right? This happens in lots of other companies where the people move up the chain and they realize they're like, oh, I'm a VP now. I know more than the people under me. That's exactly the opposite. You know less as you move up. On purpose, because you are working on more stuff. You have less context, so you should not rely on your own judgment. You should push it down and say, well, what do you guys think? All right, almost at the end. So does it work? So we've had a pretty good jump in employees, and we're probably that line's gonna get, you can see the slope increasing every time. I think it's gonna increase again in 2013. Span of control, so we're able to manage lots of people with few managers. Now that we've expanded to a bigger management team for engineering, the goal is for those people, like I told my directors, I'm like, I expect you guys to be able to handle 80 people each. That's the goal. We didn't just split people just to put a management hierarchy, and we split people so we can grow, so those directors can have 80 people under them, so the managers can have 40 people under them. That's the reason we did it. Stats, so here's a few stats. We can hire lots of co-ops in the first round. We got more resumes from Waterloo than Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, Apple, Square, Yelp, and Foursquare, which is pretty kick-ass. The only company that beat us was Google, and that was Google worldwide by only 20 resumes. That's pretty sick. We have very low attrition. Very few people quit. We always outrun other teams whenever we are against them in engineering. Less hero syndrome, so you have less of those one person has to save the day. It's usually teams coming together to fix things. We have a lot of female engineers. I think we're almost closer to 20% now. That's 1 in 5. That's really, really high, especially because we don't do anything specific to get female engineers. And then we have lots of happy people, I think. A few quotes from some people who have been by the office. You may or may not know Fred Wilson, big investor in like Twitter and Yelp and Foursquare, who came up and was like, wow, this is really different. Yogan Dalal actually invented the TCP IP spec with Vint Cerf. Came by and was like, wow, I've never even seen this in the Valley before. And Brad Feld, another investor, came by and was like, wow, it feels different if you come to our office and see what's going on there. And that's it. We are hiring. Feel free to email me. Or I'm actually up here for Q&A, so feel free to ask me anything about anything, whether it's on the slides or not. Thanks. 5, 10 minutes of questions? Sure. Questions? Yes?
I wonder if you could speak a few minutes on how you manage technical debt, especially since
Sure.
you're saying you tend to try and just pick a
Quick decision.
pick a random decision.
Yeah. Yeah, so the idea behind technical debt is there's kind of 2 ways to handle it. One, every time you're estimating stories for new features or fixing bugs, you incorporate the estimate into that feature or story. So you're like, hey, we think it's going to take 3 days, but it's probably 2 days of refactoring, so we're going to mark it as a week. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is typically when we are, let's say we have a project phase 1 and phase 2, and there's a 2 or 3 week gap in the middle to get feedback from the App Store or the users. We could work on technical debt then.
And what would your mix be of new code versus older code?
I don't know. It's like a Graham question. I have no idea. What's the mix between new code and old code when we're refactoring? I mean, what we try to do is, like I said, work on, so it's, maybe I'll rephrase my original answer. We try to work on stuff when we try to work on refactoring when we're working on new code so that we're not just writing things in a silo. Like what you shouldn't be doing, hopefully, is that you're not trying to take code and you're like, hey, no one's working on this right now, I'm going to go in and refactor it, because you kind of have no context. But what we do is, definitely engineers are putting stories into Tracker that are technical chores that say, I want to come back and refactor this later. So you have a set of refactoring stories. And then hopefully you incorporate that in with the code for your client. And you say, hey, you know what? This is an estimate of what we have to do, but there's all these refactoring pieces we have to do, and that'll make things faster later. And so we have to incorporate that into our estimates.
Do you explicitly track your debt in any way?
Just by technical chores in Tracker. I don't think there's like a metric anywhere, unless Graham tells me there's something. Probably just technical. So chores in Tracker are the way we can track that. What was that? Chores? Yeah. Yeah.
How do you manage regards to architecture and code quality, excessive refactoring, and when you should make decisions to refactor rather than to wait until later?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, again, it's very similar. Because we're working on stuff that is longer lasting, we do have to think about that. But typically what we've done is, whenever people start the project, they're typically folks who are more experienced. So they're helping set up the framework for the architecture of the application. Things will change, though. And as things change, we'll put those architectural or refactoring stories into Tracker as we come up with them. So, hey, I should rewrite this. I should move this module out. All those stories can go into Tracker. And then they're hopefully attacked when you're writing new code. And the estimates have to get rolled in with the client to say, hey, we have to do this part because it'll make the next season or the next release more effective. Otherwise, it'll take us a long time to make these similar changes. That's typically how we do it, yeah.
Has it been a challenge with clients as you're doing more of an agile approach, like from a project pricing perspective? You get into like, just how do you manage time expectations?
Yeah.
Like a TNM model?
Yeah, we do. It's funny. We've come like a full circle. A lot of clients, obviously, a lot of clients that work with us have only ever done fixed bid projects. And then when they come to us, they're like, okay, we want these features by this date. And right away I say, okay, what I'm hearing is, like, let's take everything you want and let's prioritize it. And they're like, oh, but we want everything. I'm like, that's cool. You're going to want everything, but either way, we need an order in which to work in. So they buy that. So we put it in order, and then we go, okay, we're going to give you an estimate for what we think we're going to get to here, but we're not committing to this list. And they're like, what do you mean? And we're like, well, you're going to sit in the optometrist chair and you're going to play with this app on your phone, and we want to allow you the flexibility to make decisions based on you're using the device and using the application. We don't want to tie you down to this list. We can tie you to this list, and if you want to make changes to that, we can do like a CR, a change request, every time you make a change. That'll just make things slower on our end and your end. What we'd rather do is say, we think this will take 16 weeks as an estimate, and as we start moving, you can make changes in priorities, and we may really only get to here, and probably with some things that weren't even in your original spec, but you'll definitely get an amazing experience. And they typically are okay with that, especially after they start seeing builds like within 2 weeks.
Reading between the lines, do you kind of eschew sprint plannings of all sorts?
So Tracker implicitly, because it's got everything in order, gives you a sprint plan, and we put release markers in there weekly. It gives you a plan, and it gives you a plan for like the next N sprints. Every week when we do story acceptance, the product owner will look at the next 2 weeks of sprints and ensure that the priority looks okay. It doesn't, every week, every project has a different day of the week, but whatever day it is, Wednesday, every Wednesday they'll do story acceptance and they'll look at the next set of work. Typically product owners, once they use the Tracker, are in there every day. It's like their open tab. They know exactly what's going on and they can reprioritize at will, but every week is kind of when the big things move. Yeah?
You said you work on internal projects as well.
Yep.
What kind of projects are those?
Interesting. So we're working on a platform now called Excel Studio, and what it does, it's a combination of a framework to make writing native and web mobile applications easier, along with lifecycle management. So what we used to do was just engineering, and now we do lots of strategy. We help folks understand what they should be building, along with building it, and then along with what happens after we launch it. So we have a platform to help manage that. We write lots of modules that we now are open sourcing as well to make development easier on iOS, on Android. What else do we do? Yeah, that's kind of it. Like we try to make engineering easier for companies. So we have folks focus on tools. We're doing some internal projects, like we did one last year, which spun out called Gluco, which connected diabetes monitors to Android and iOS. We did Blue Trumpet, which is a mobile ad network. So we do things with partners that we think can be successful. Yeah.
What's the largest engineering team you have working on a project, and does that ever cause a hindrance for dependencies between stories, or a very large kind of storyboard where things just don't make sense for a large team?
Yeah.
Because there's so many dependencies.
What's the largest team we have, and how does that, does anything change in the process? So the one thing that changes in the process is one thing I didn't talk about is the idea of an anchor. So what an anchor engineer is the lead engineer on the project who can never be removed from the project. So because we have pairing, we can move the other person, but the anchor can't be moved. When projects get bigger, what we say is when you go to 2 pairs, it's 4 engineers, but when you go to 3 pairs, you need 7 engineers. And what that means is one engineer becomes the super anchor and starts overseeing what's going on. They're coding, they're side-by-side coding with folks, and they're working with everybody, but there's 3 pairs that they manage. And then once that gets bigger, we can add, it'll go from 7 to 9 to 11 to 15 then, and you actually have 2 super anchors. So the idea is that the only thing that changes, the team gets bigger, but the people who were originally just pairing as part of pairs become like overarching architecture responsibility folks, as well as helping manage the client. They can be the single point of contact for the client as well. That's the only thing that changes. But
when you have more stories into that list,
it depends. Here's our answer to that. We would split it into other projects, other trackers. So we might say, hey, you're working on this module, we're going to put it into zone tracker. You're working on this component, we'll put it into zone tracker. That's one way to do it. I don't think NBA did that. So you guys had one big tracker. So what's your answer for that?
It was a little strange, but you can tag,
put labels on. Yeah. So you can label the stories and say this is part of this module. It's the same idea of saying this is your component. So you would go down from top to bottom until you hit your component label and start there. Yeah? Oh yeah, so Tracker has something called epics, which is a large set of stories put together for a large feature.
2 more questions.
Yeah, 2 more questions. All right, 1. How much maintenance do we do? So we have 2 maintenance models with our clients. One is they can pay for like a warranty where we have a sustained engineering pair. So every week we have a different pair on sustained engineering where they can help fix anything from any client. And clients can say, hey, I just need like a bug fix. We don't do any new feature work there. Or they typically would say, you know what, we want to pay for a release once a quarter. So they'll pay for like 3 weeks a quarter, and we'll go full time on the project for those 3 weeks. And they're engaged, we're engaged, and we ship something at the end of the 3 weeks. When we're not on the clock, everything that they would think about during that time period, including user reviews and bug tracking, would all go into Tracker so that we know what to work on when we get to the 3 weeks. Last one. You didn't answer. I didn't answer a question from you yet. Yeah.
Do you ever run into a resource crunch? Like
all the time.
How do you manage that?
So I mean, there's two ways. One, we're hiring a ton of people, right? I mean, every year we've doubled so far, and the idea is that we are always looking for smart people. So how do we manage that? With a client, if a client's like, hey, we have to hit this timeline and we need more engineers, either we shut off things that are happening internally. If we don't see like a natural ramp down of another project, then we can say, okay, well, let's put this on pause and put those engineers on this project. Or, I mean, we're always hiring, so hopefully there's somebody who's coming in the pipe that can come out of that project. Or we tell the client, hey, we don't have folks. Is what it is. Cool? All right, that's it. Thanks, everyone.